I love playing Yu-Gi-Oh, but this game isn't always perfect. So the other day, here on the YouTube community tab and also over on Twitter, I asked you guys what were your biggest complaints with the game. I made a poll based on things that I've heard commonly said about the game, and I wanted to see the results. And they were pretty interesting. So today I wanted to critique Yu-Gi-Oh a bit and talk about the biggest concerns that people have, that I even sometimes have about the game, and those being the price of the game, the rules being a bit complicated, and the power creep. So I'm going to take these one by one, break them down, why I think they're an issue, but also how I think they could be improved. Okay, so far and away, people seem to agree that the price of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the biggest issue in the game right now, and I can totally see why. This game's expensive to play, and I guess that's not wholly a bad thing. Like, it's a thing that you collect or it's a thing that you play competitively. It makes sense that it will cost something. A lot of hobbies have high priced things attached to them, so that's not particularly weird. Other card games can be like this, and other stuff like that. I think the thing with Yu-Gi-Oh though that can make it feel a little bit not so fun in that regard is mainly that you need to have cards that are expensive sometimes to feel like you have a chance. And that I do feel is where the problem comes in because in Yu-Gi-Oh there are plenty of, meta decks or competitive decks, tournament decks, whatever you want to call them. And these will be really strong archetypes and they have cards that you need to have in order to play them at the top level. You can circumvent a lot of this just by playing more casually, playing on a budget. There usually are budget alternatives to a lot of expensive cards, and there are plenty of decks that are very easy to get. They're printed in low rarities, they're reprinted a lot or something like that. They might not be as strong, but you can play them and you can enjoy yourself. And I've always been a big proponent of the idea that, if you aren't planning on going to, these top level events and traveling every other weekend for them, which I guess you can't do right now either way, but yeah, if you aren't that type of player, then there's really no reason to spend loads and loads of money on cards. Like, this game can get expensive. Like, if you're not going to go to a YCS and try to like win every single time, then why spend $300 on a playset of lightning storms or whatever the expensive card of the day is? A bit of a snag there, though, is this thing called short printing, and I'm sure you've all heard about it. I think this is something that Yu-Gi-Oh! Really has had a problem with in recent years more than anything. I don't know why that's changed exactly. I don't know if it's like a matter of people maybe being more aware that short printing is happening, or if it's the short printing problem itself is getting worse. I'm not really entirely sure, but short printing is something that Konami has been doing quite a bit. It's not a secret. I'm not going to sit here and try to defend them. I really do feel like cards just get short printed, and I don't think it's cool. I think it's normal for a card game to have cards that are harder to get, but I don't think it's cool that it's always the cards that like people need. So, for instance, I think that let's take a card like Fantastical Dragon Phantasme. This is a card that came out early last year and it was very expensive, very hard to get, and very necessary in competitive play. However, I think it was fine that it was pretty expensive because it wasn't at all necessary in casual play. In fact, there were better cards than it kind of just on the surface, right? If you got yourself copies of Common Ash Blossom or just ran like Ghost Ogre or Effect Veiler, these were perfectly fine hand traps that could more or less do the same job. Phantasme was really only at its most useful if you had three copies, but also if you were playing in tournaments where, Link monsters were everywhere and you needed to have Phantasme and stuff. You didn't see casual players, hoping to get like three Phantasmes all the time and feeling like they were being gated off from enjoying the game because they didn't have it. On the other hand, though, a card like Pot of Extravagance is a little bit different to me. This is a card that was actually printed in the same set as Phantasme that, got as high as like $100 at sometimes. And to me, that's a much more extreme issue when it's a card that so many decks need. There are plenty of competitive decks that needed Pot of Extravagance, but there are also a lot of casual strategies that really could use a card like Pot of Extravagance. It's good, easy draw power, and it's a shame that it's a secret rare and so difficult to get and so expensive. That's where my issues come in with like short printing and that sort of thing. I have no problems with cards that are meant to be strictly competitive for the strictly competitive crowd being tough to get. I don't like it when a card like Pot of Extravagance or even like Lightning Storm or something like that, Boral Sword Dragon that a lot of people want to just be so tough to get. And it also kind of gets annoying when like a casual strategy is mostly easy to get, but has like one short printed card. A great example recently has been the Eldritch deck or the Emancipator deck, where everything's pretty easy to get except like one card, one maybe two cards in these archetypes. It's weird because sometimes these are otherwise casual decks. Like let's take Witchcrafters last year. They had Witchcrafter Creation, and it was like $30. And it's an essential card to play the deck. But the problem is the deck's not like fantastic. It's not a YCS winning deck. It's okay, it's fun, I've built it, I play it, I like it, but for a long time you just couldn't play it because you couldn't get the most essential card because it was short printed. So it's just weird to me, like these archetypes that are targeted towards, mostly casual play. I'm not saying they're bad, but just mostly casual play still gets short prints, and it kind of is weird to me. So there are solutions to this. You can obviously choose to play the game on a budget level. You can find your budget replacements. You can play your less expensive decks, Tinyis, Megaliths, some more. All these things come to mind. But on the other hand, there's also stuff that I feel maybe Konami should be doing. Cutting down on the short printing. I've heard rumors that like Eternity Code and onwards aren't going to be short printed. Maybe it's in the US, maybe it's in the UK, or maybe it's in the US, maybe it's in Europe. No clue about that part. But I definitely think that cutting down on the short printing would help. Also, something that doesn't get talked about a lot is sort of, I don't know what the term would be for this, but basically like card density in sets. I think a big reason why a lot of cards have gotten so expensive lately, like Lightning Storm and Appaloosa, is actually because these cards come in sets that otherwise have not much value to them. So what do I mean by that? Well, basically, if there's like a set that comes out and it's got a lot of good cards in it that you can pull, then those good cards will be expensive, but not like ridiculously expensive. However, if you get a set like let's say Rising Rampage, where there's really not a lot of cards that like people want, like we're talking chase cards, right? There's just Appaloosa and I mean maybe Gizmek was in there. That's actually where the issue comes in. Not a lot of people want to buy sets that aren't good, so they don't buy loads of them. But there is like one good card in Appaloosa because there's no other good secrets to pull. And if you buy a box and you pull two secrets and they're not Appaloosa, then you don't feel like you made your money back. Then it sort of starts to make the relative value of Appaloosa go up. And the same can be said about Lightning Storm and Ignition Assault. There aren't really too many other great cards. Again, there's like a Gizmek, it's a secret, it's okay, it's kind of got a price tag, but other than that, there's just nothing good. The main archetypes in a lot of these sets, like Marincess or Ignisters, didn't end up actually making a big difference in the game, so those aren't seen as really valuable to pull. So the end result is that you get one card out of a set and it's just ridiculously expensive, and now it's just gated off of players. I think that's a problem with sort of Konami's set design sometimes. I think that if we could get more powerful archetypes or perhaps even just like more useful staples and they were all distributed as secret rares so that anybody could buy a box and feel like they're getting some value out of it, we might see the average price of cards go down. Don't know entirely about that though. There might be some issues there. And last but not least, I think some fault does fall on us as players. I mean, if we are the ones who choose to buy these cards, then, you can't deny that at least some part of that price value thing is our fault. Because if there's someone out there who's willing to pay $100 for, an Appaloosa or a Lightning Storm or whatever card it is, then that's kind of where the market price ends up. I have always said, if you don't think these cards are worth it, don't buy them. I know there's always going to be someone out there who does, but I think that if collectively as a community we could agree to just not buy these cards for so much, maybe we could see some slight decreases, but that might just be a pipe dream. Okay, the number 2 thing was power creep and deck imbalance in Yu-Gi-Oh! And this is a huge one for me. So for those of you who don't know what power creep is, it's the idea that cards, in this case at least, it can happen in video games and stuff like that too, but cards become stronger and stronger and stronger over time. It's sort of a natural progression and also a business tactic. So basically, if there's an existing set of cards and people are comfortable with them, then the company needs to be able to sell new cards that come out. So when we release new cards, they need to be better in some way than the existing cards that we already had. So by making these cards better, they're more desirable, they sell the new products, but as a result, you get power creep, where older themes, older decks, strategies, cards, whatever, are not able to compete anymore. And this is obvious with Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh's got one of the more extreme cases of it, to be completely honest. If you look at some old powerhouse decks, Black Wings, Zombies, Gladiator Beasts, or Light Sworns, or X Sabers, none of them can compete today. Like, it's not even close. I mean, today's decks are just so much stronger, and it's not just the deck themes themselves that are stronger, it's also just the way that the game is played. We always talk about how the game's become so dice roll centric. Going first is such a huge deal because decks can put out so much. There are, turns are longer, combos are longer. That's something I actually really don't like. But yeah, it's just like decks are supposed to put out multiple negations on the first turn. You put out your 3 or 4 negates, and these monsters that can't be targeted and can't be destroyed, and you can just summon them all on your first turn, and it feels so top heavy and extreme. Like, the game isn't. It sometimes doesn't even get to reach the next few turns because the person who goes first either goes nuts and the other person can't play, or they get interrupted and then they just have to scoot because it's kind of one of these glass cannon style decks. It sucks that Yu-Gi-Oh feels that way, and it gets even worse when you consider that the counterplay to these strategies has also had to ramp up so much in power. I remember when kaijus first came out and that was seen as a big deal, but we actually don't see a lot of kaijus even played anymore. Nowadays, the way that you deal with these problems is like through extreme measures. Cards like Lightning Storm, Evenly Matched, Dark Ruler No More, where your opponent can't even respond to it, or the Winged Dragon of Ra Spear mode, where it literally distributes 3 things as a cost, or Super Poly, where they can't respond, and Nibiru, which just sucks up everything, and just like, you get the point. It's so crazy to me that, the power level of decks has gotten so high that in order to answer any of it, we also have to have these obnoxiously strong, like, response cards for going second. And to me, neither thing is okay. I don't really like that decks are this powerful and, the games just are so short sometimes. Short but long. Short in that it's like 1 or 2 turns, but long in that the turn usually takes a while. That's an issue. And I think that, more than anything, could be one of the reasons that causes Yu-Gi-Oh! To eventually, I don't want to say die, but just be unpleasant to play. Now, there's a caveat to me. Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be a lot of fun when you're playing with decks of the same weight class. So for instance, if I'm playing Witchcrafters versus Evil Eyes, it's a pretty fair matchup in my opinion. It's a lot of fun. The same could be said of playing like the Rika deck against, say, just an Infinitrack deck. They're pretty level powered decks. They're about even. They both have strategies. They're not trying to completely shut each other out. It's a good time. And you could even say that with like Tinyi versus a Samora deck, for instance. These are similar weight class decks, and you can have a good time playing them. But the issue is, Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't actually offer a way for you to guarantee that you'll play decks of the same weight class. Because what if I like playing my Tinyi deck? It's not the best deck in the world, but I like playing it, but I want to go to tournaments. I'm going to get completely stomped out. And that is where I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Really needs to create some alternative format. A way where I can play a low power deck if I want to and just only face other low power decks. Or if I want to play a really powerful deck right now, Adamanticators maybe would be an example, or Shaddoll Invoked, or Spirals from last format, Orcus for instance. And I can go in a tournament and play other things like that because I'm okay with it. That's not a problem. That's totally fine. I just wish that there was a discrepancy. Other card games have these alternative formats, some of which are more fun for casual players or newer players. Yu-Gi-Oh! Just doesn't really have that, and that really, really, to me, is just awful that the power creep has to increase and increase and increase, but, we don't, like, there's not a way for you to just play at a slower pace if you're outside of playing with your friends. So I had an interesting idea about how this could be solved, and I get it, it's not practical, but just hear me out. So what if cards were printed in such a way that it reflected their power levels? So you know how a lot of like the low tier decks are usually printed as commons, rares, maybe supers. What if your deck's rarity was tied to how strong it is, and then tournaments could have things where like all common cards allowed here, like only commons, or they're only rares, or only supers. Because I look at a deck like, say, Tinyi, right? They're almost all rares, and it's also kind of a weak deck. What if decks of Tinyi power level were only printed as rares, but then decks of like Orcus power level or Spiral power level, I guess today like Adamanticator power level were printed as like all ultras or all secrets. Now, I get it, this isn't practical at all. I know you're going to be like, Paul, that's stupid, doesn't make sense. But I'm just saying it'd be nice if there was a way to distinguish between, how strong decks are and what decks they should be like playing against if you want to still have a good time with Yu-Gi-Oh! It's not a perfect idea, but if you have something better, please let me know in the comments. Okay, so the last big thing that came up on that poll is Yu-Gi-Oh! Being too confusing to learn. And this actually is totally valid. So with Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now, the game technically isn't loads different than it was at the start in terms of rules, but at the same time, it is. So, like, yes, we still have attack points, defense points, monsters, spells, traps. That's all the same. But we've got so many different summoning mechanics that have been introduced into the game every few years. And then also we've got a lot of just deep, complex rulings that have existed, but like have never gotten as intense as they are now. So I think of just things like, chain blocking and missing the timing. This stuff was like always around in Yu-Gi-Oh, but now it's so much more relevant because if you use like a Shadal fusion and make a construct and like you're sending these things to the grave and there's a cross sheet, then suddenly you've got 3 or 4 or even like 5 effects going off on a chain, and then like your opponent can't respond here, but they can't respond here. That type of thing gets really crazy. And then also, we've got cards that miss the timing. We've got damage step stuff. We've got things that can negate some things, can't negate other things. I actually feel like teaching a new player Yu-Gi-Oh right now is just it's almost like a one-way street. Like Yu-Gi-Oh's got the in group and the out group. If you've played Yu-Gi-Oh for a really long time, or even just a few years, then new mechanics actually they come pretty naturally. They're not all that hard to learn. Like learning Link Monsters wasn't the hardest thing to do. Same with Pendulums for me because I've played Yu-Gi-Oh for a long time. But at the same time, if you are a new person and you're just trying to introduce like a friend or a relative or whatever into Yu-Gi-Oh for the very first time, it's so much because you've got like fusions and synchros and exes and they each have like these different summoning things. Then you have links and then you have pendulums and like those get even crazier because they don't even follow a lot of the same rules. And it can like really feel overbearing. I was reading an article in TCG Player the other day by Kelly Locke. It's actually about why we don't need a new summoning mechanic in Yu-Gi-Oh! But I think that he summed up the whole sort of Yu-Gi-Oh! Being too complicated thing really well, so I'm just going to quote him here. Imagine explaining a concept like quick effects and trigger effects to a new player. Your first attempt might go smoothly. Quick effects can be activated during either player's turn and start a chain, and trigger effects occur when specific conditions are met and also start a chain. But you're not done, of course, because you still need to outline chains and spell speed. That's the easy part. Before you know it, you're diving into concepts like missing the timing, the difference between when and if in regards to activation conditions, and somewhere between explaining why you can't activate some effects during the damage step and detailing chain blocking, you've already lost the player that you're trying to teach. So that, I think, really sums it up pretty well. I think with Yu-Gi-Oh, if you've played this game and you kind of get it all, fine. But that's going to be a big issue for new people. There's so much stuff that you have to learn just to sort of start enjoying Yu-Gi-Oh and not being constantly stumped at every turn because, oh, your effect doesn't actually work that way. Oh, no, that you can't actually do that here. It's that I think is going to be the biggest threat to Yu-Gi-Oh's longevity is just how difficult this game can be to pick up and play sometimes. And it goes further. Look at any card effect these days. Like, it's alphabet soup. There's so many words, and the cards are just so loaded with stuff. I know people make jokes about, the pendulum Endymion guy, but like, a lot of cards are like that now. This card cannot be normal surrender set. It can only be this. You can only activate the effect of this once per turn. When it's in your hand, it does this. When it's in the grave, it does that. You can chain it to do that and negate this, that, and the other. And it's just, there can be so much text. And like when you're playing against a deck that you don't know about, and you have to read each of your opponent's cards because, you're trying to be a responsible player, read your cards, make sure you don't miss anything. You can waste loads of time just reading cards and trying to understand them. And then your opponent has to read your cards, and you're both having to read cards. It can get really out of hand really fast, and I've seen it firsthand with just trying to teach people how to play this game. So I feel like there are a few solutions here. Konami has obviously tried doing the whole problem-solving card text thing, and I don't think it's bad. I just think that it's not enough, right? They've tried to sort of simplify cards so that it's easier to understand like costs and effect timing and stuff like that. And it works for that, but there's still so many words just on these effects. It would be nice if Yu-Gi-Oh could use keywords or symbols like other games do. I know we're kind of just too deep in it now to change how it's done, But, piercing, right? That's something that I feel could just be changed. Once per turn really could just be a symbol, like these hard once per turn effects, just make a symbol on them. Even Omni negates, to be completely honest, could be like, I wish that we could just condense that into just one word or very short phrase or term. I think, or even like, float instead of when this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, maybe just float. I don't know. I think this would at least help. I mean, technically, it wouldn't change the complication and confusion of the game, but it would be easier to just see at a glance why something works or how something works or when you're supposed to activate stuff. And the game would be like more visually pleasing to look at and introduce to a new person. And just to play devil's advocate here, Yu-Gi-Oh! Getting more complicated isn't necessarily a bad thing. There's actually a lot of depth that we've gotten in the game through hand traps, through chain blocking, through a lot of stuff like that. Like, you can be really creative and there are a lot more things and moving parts to keep up with, but that makes the strategy feel more fun. It's just that, like, that's for people who've played the game a long time. If you're new, this stuff is just way too much. Even when you're calling the judge, sometimes it can be just like a little bit of an experience for a new person, because sometimes cards literally don't work the way that they seem to read like they do. Like, if we're talking about if versus when, you read a card and it says, when this card is sent to the graveyard, you can do this. And it sounds like it should work, but then someone has to explain to you why it misses the timing. Or you read a card like Solemn Judgment and it says, like, when your opponent summons a monster, you can negate it. But then you have to explain, well, no, it's only if it's a monster that doesn't start a chain, not actually, a monster summon that results from a card effect like Monster Reborn. So it can negate that, but it can't negate that, even though the text says it just negates a summon. So for a new person, that just isn't very intuitive. Then you get to lump in all the player-made terminology like inherent summons or spell speed 4 or chain blocking. These are terms that don't technically exist, like they're not official things, but they are real concepts. So it's like, if you're trying to understand it and you're new and you hear one thing from one person, another thing from another person, it gets really crazy. So all in all, I think that the solution to this would be keywords, yes, for sure. Also, rush duels and speed duels kind of seem like they've been trying to solve it, simplifying the rules, simplifying the card pool. That helps not only with the complication of things, but also the power creep problem. Okay, so I feel like that covers pretty much everything that people were talking about in that poll. What do you guys think? Do you feel like these are issues that are just inherent to Yu-Gi-Oh? There's no hope, it's just gonna be the way it is, and we're gonna ride this train until it crashes or whatever happens? Or do you feel like there is, there's still like some time for things to be corrected? And how do you think they should be corrected? Because I had ideas here, but as you guys can see, I mean, it's a tough, no one can do this perfectly. Konami does a good job for what it's worth, but I mean, there's always stuff they could be doing better. Let me know down in the comments. This has been a long one, so hopefully you stuck around. Anyway, if you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh stuff. We're almost at 200,000 subscribers, so I'd really appreciate that. And come hang out with us on Twitter, Instagram. I'd appreciate that as well. Maybe Discord. Okay, that's going to be it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Pass turn.